All right, so we're gonna do 10 keys to back pain. So this isn't necessarily a 10-step process. It's just gonna be basically, look, here are 10 things we've learned over the last, I don't even know. So the first thing is that you need to understand when you have a back diagnosis, it's not the end of the world. Did you guys know that 85% of Olympians, US Olympians, have a diagnosis of a herniated, bulging, or otherwise damaged spinal disc? Did you guys know that? How many of you guys knew that? That 85% of Olympians, world-class athletes, are diagnosed with some sort of disc injury, right? That's a massive amount. However, every single year or every 4 years, we watch the Olympic Games and these athletes are able to perform at insanely high levels at every single sport across the board, right? And if you talk to most of them, like I worked with Olympic weightlifters for a long time, and you talk to them, hey, do you have back pain? They're like, maybe a little bit here and there, but like for the most part, not anything outside of the ordinary. So understanding that just because you went and you got an MRI and the doctor looks at you and he's like, got some real bad news, you have a herniated disc, your life's over, you'll never walk again. And I had that happen to me when I was like 14. Not really walking again, but he's like, you'll never jump again. And I was like, are you kidding me? So I have an identical twin brother, right? He also had a herniated disc. He did have surgery, I didn't have surgery, right? So here's an interesting case study. We're identical twins. We are the same genetic makeup. My brother was a distance runner, I was a jumper. He had the back surgery, I didn't have the back surgery. His back, before the surgery, was way worse distance running. He didn't do any strength training, I did. I didn't have surgery. I had 3 herniated discs from L3 to L5. Now I'm 30 years old, so that would have been 12 years ago. He's fine, I'm fine. I'm actually more functional than he is in most weightlifting movements and jumping movements, while my brother has had to be extra careful because they went in and took out an anatomical structure that I didn't have taken out. As far as mobility, we're pretty much exactly the same. Please, just because you have that diagnosis does not mean you need to go in, have them cut you open, and take that part of your spine out. Don't freak out just because you have back pain. So the second thing, the second key, and it relates to the first one, is being patient. When you have a back injury, you need to be extremely patient. And Travis, come up here. Travis, go ahead, grab Isaiah's mic. Talk a little bit about how patient you had to be. So how long did it take you to get back to 100%? So it took you basically 7 months to get back to what was normal, correct? So you would say seven or so months of progressing up very slowly, each of these elements. What was the number one mistake you made when those warning signals started going off? So you basically were like, you know what, instead of actually dealing with the issue, I think I'm just gonna keep jumping and ignore this completely. If you rush this process, when you have especially the initial back flare up, you're gonna make that entire process last even longer.
Travis, it took him 7 months, but he was a very extreme case. And not just that, he made a lot of errors. It can be a lot faster than that, especially if you aren't doing like under both dunks or stuff that requires flexion when you're dunking and that type of thing. I don't want you guys to be scared and be like, oh shit, it's about to be a year until I can function normally.
It also depends on the injury, is that if you have a bone injury, lumbar vertebrae, if you have a crack in that, that's a different injury than if you have a herniated disc. Or maybe if your disc is bulging a little bit, pushing on the nerve. So each of those injuries probably has a different timeline, and that just depends on the specific injury that you have and the severity of that injury. Number 3, back pain can be masked.
Now, before we get into that third key of back pain, I just gotta let you guys know, if you have back pain, you can get help from Isaiah Rivera and John Evans themselves. THPstrength.com, the link is in the description. Go get some help. Now, depending on your injury, they will walk you through step by step. You're given exercises, reps, sets, weights, percentages, videos, how-tos. And through your recovering, you can maintain your athletic performance or even improve. So again, if you have back pain, or if you just want general training or jump training, link is in the description.
Meaning, you might have back pain and you don't feel the pain in your back. So those of you with back pain, how many of you guys have what's called referred pain, or pain that is actually running down your leg? Raise your hand high. When you have an injury to your spine, specifically if it's with a disc, which is commonly what jumpers will get, we go back to this slide here, we'll keep bouncing back to this. See that red part where it says the nerve is basically pinched? What's happening is that nerve goes out and it innervates a muscle in your body. That muscle is then obviously able to contract because of that connection. So your spine and that spinal cord that connects from your brain to your muscle, when that gets basically pinched or innervated or pissed off, you might have referred pain. So sometimes guys will look at me and be like, dude, I'm having this weird pain and my hand is like numbing. or I'm having this weird pain and this numbness and this like almost like it feels like a pull in my hamstring. But they can still do 99% of the training, but then their pain levels will go up and down. They'll kind of have these weird symptoms. And they're like, I don't know what it is. I think I pulled my hamstring. I'm like, do you have a history of like back pain, or have you ever had back pain? And then they're like, oh yeah, for sure. And I'm like, have you considered maybe the fact that you have like a herniated disc or bulging disc or something? And they're like, no, I've never thought about it. And then you treat their back. You start doing 15-minute walks. You start doing the Go Big 3, which we'll get into. You start taking out some of the compressive loading, and all of a sudden, that pain clears up completely. All right, so number four is 15-minute walks. So one of the easiest things that we do with all of our athletes every day, probably, or we recommend our athletes do as part of your daily schedule, is just a 15-minute walk.
Make sure it's with a brisk pace, big arm swing. The purpose of it is nerve flossing, and a lot of people, what they take out of like back health stuff is do the Go Big 3. This is way more important and has made the biggest difference with my back, especially during the flare-up. All
right, number 5, the Go Big 3. And this is what Isaiah and I just mentioned. So one of the easiest things you can do on top of the 15-minute walk is going to be the McGill Big 3. And this is basically doing bracing exercises. So it's doing specifically the bird dog, curl up, and then the side plank. And there are regressions and progressions of this exercise. But it's basically microdosing the spine to teach it how to build endurance, to build the internal muscles of your abdomen and your low back and your obliques and your sides, and these deep intra-abdominal muscles so that you're able to brace effectively, which supports the spine during a lot of different types of loading. So specifically jumping, you have to be very, very strong in your core, but it's not curls that necessarily will develop that. It's more so this kind of isometric, quasi-isometric strength, which is this support while I'm running full speed, planting my foot into the ground and experiencing 11 times, 10 times body weight on a single leg, right? To do that, if your spine's weak, or hypothetically, if you had no muscle, your whole body would just do this. You just kind of flop, or just go back, and that would be really bad. So being able to brace and support your spine with those muscles, those intra-abdominal muscles, is very important. And then Isaiah, you had told me this, is basically, this also allows you to get through daily activities of like life. So number 6, load management. This is a huge part of getting healthy and what Travis had to do. Load management does not necessarily just apply to your tendons. If you're feeling back pain or you're having issues with your spine, it's probably because, again, your capacity is lower than what you're doing. So that's your body sending you warning signs early on, and if you keep pushing through that, specifically if you're feeling like pain during an exercise and you have a history of low back pain, that's your body telling you to shut it down. With your back pain, you typically don't want to work through pain. So you want to remove all of the highly compressed loading early on and slowly add it back in. Pull out deadlifts, pull out squats, replace it with leg press, and basically build back in to those movements. Now, if you do have a flare-up, you basically want to return to that exercise in about a week or two when the pain comes down. So don't just come back to it the next day. Number 7, when you feel pain, that's your body telling you to stop, and you should listen to it when it comes to your spine. With your tendon, you could warm it up, come back down, warm it up, right? It's a different type of structure. When it comes to back pain, you don't want to do that. If your back hurts, it's your body communicating with you, hey, if you keep pushing this, you're going to do some damage that might be irreparable, and it's going to take you out for 6 to 7 months. So you need to listen to those warning signs and not keep pushing through it. The worse your back is, the less freedom you have. What this basically means is, I have low back pain, Isaiah has low back pain. What have you cut out of your training, basically long-term as a result?
Deep back squatting.
You want to pay attention to the things that are really irritable for your spine, and you want to avoid some of those exercises. So as an example, Isaiah took out under boths for a long time, right?
Yeah, it was like a year and a half, almost 2 years that I didn't do them.
Right? I don't pull from the floor when I do cleans. I will not pull from the floor on cleans. I won't pull from the floor on snatches, and that's because of my low back. Because if I have to get into the bottom of that movement, I'm going to round my low back like this. I don't have the mobility for it. It's going to overload it, and I'm going to have problems. The goal is to jump higher, right? That's the goal. Keep the goal the goal. If that lifting is going to hurt my back and take away from the goal, then I'm not going to do that. Number 9, stop blaming pain on bad form. So this is a slide from someone else, but I thought it was very, very, very applicable. If you're lifting like this and you have back pain, the reason you have back pain is because you're lifting like this. You're doing loaded flexion. The goal is not to build up your spine in flexion. The goal is to build your spine outside of flexion so that when you do go into flexion, you can handle it. I always tell people you want to have a stiff chassis, right? If I'm a car, if I'm a Ferrari, do I want to have a really like crappy chassis on it that's going to bend a lot around turns? No. They make it from carbon fiber because it's light and it's stiff. The same thing's true of your spine in the sense that you need a lot of stiffness and stability when you're planting your foot, like I said, right? And you're gonna jump as high as you can. Or if you're gonna do an under both, maybe your sport requires you to go into flexion. Maybe you're UFC or you're a gymnast and you have to go into flexion to perform your sport. Well, it's not safe for you to run full speed in football with your head down, but people do it every day. So same thing's true, you're gonna have to do things in your sport that maybe aren't good for your health. But if you wanna have these performance goals, or if you have these performance goals, okay, how do we prevent you from getting injuries when you do have to do that relatively higher risk activity? I don't wanna go into the weight room and add relatively risky exercises to prep me for more relatively risky exercises. I wanna go into the weight room to allow me to handle the loading of the relatively risky stuff when it happens. And so that's why we wanna make sure, do we have good posture? Are we in spinal flexion and loading in spinal flexion? Are we moving into spinal flexion as we're going into a squat or we're going into a deadlift, right? The most important thing is having good posture and basically not letting your spine angulate or move.
Yeah, we have a cool analogy. So imagine a regenerative eraser, right? You have an eraser and you can wear it out a little bit and the eraser can grow back. But if you let the eraser wear down all the way to the metal part, that's when you get in big, big trouble. So think of your back like a regenerative eraser. And also the problem with flexion is more so loaded flexion. Talking with Stuart McGill, he said under bolts is fine. He's worked with gymnasts that go into a lot of flexion, UFC fighters that go into a lot of flexion, but they don't train loaded flexion, right? They train with a neutral spine, load it progressively, increase the capacity, and then when you practice your sport, it's okay to go into those flex positions as long as it doesn't cause pain, right? If the next day you wake up and you're sore, you probably should stay away from flexion for a little bit until you increase your capacity.
You want to think of it like reloading is your training. You don't want to be firing your silver bullets in your training and like the eraser that can repair itself. Once you get down to the metal, like with any cartilage, you're in trouble. You've erased away the cartilage to nothingness, you have no padding between your bones, and that obviously is going to cause pain. So don't shoot your silver bullets in your training. Shoot your silver bullets in your event where it actually matters when you're going into flexion or when you need to go into flexion, right? So if Isaiah's doing under boths, he's firing a silver bullet. I don't want him to go in the weight room and skin the cat with 115 pounds. I don't want him to curl down and curl back up because that's going to make his back healthy. No, it might desensitize it for a little bit, but you're going to basically push the cartilage in a way that's going to be provocative and potentially cause pain in the long term. And you don't really need to train that. Just go do your sport. That's going to train it way better. Law of specificity.
And that'll be it for this lecture from Dunk Camp Dallas 2023. Like this video if you found it helpful. And if you have any questions about back pain, let us know in the comments below. And lastly, subscribe if you enjoy learning how to be the best possible athlete you can be. And again, if you're looking for training, maybe you have knee pain, maybe you have back pain, or maybe you just want to jump as high as you possibly can. Link in the description below, THPstrength.com. See you guys next time.